It's always my pleasure to be here, and you have so many good ideas. Can I steal the service award for Auburn? Do you mind? I mean, I just write it down. Like, you are amazing, but you already know that, don't you? So a few months back now, after years of drafts, years of heated discussion, yes, years of division, our Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly passed a bylaws revision of our shared values, and that's what we call them, our shared values. For the first time since 1987, it took nearly 4 years following the convening of a study commission in the fall of 2020. On the way to a final overwhelmingly affirmative vote in support of these changes, there were focus groups, there were individual interviews, there were congregational surveys, there were Zoom discussions, endless Zoom discussions, a lot of back and forth social media. It is now in Article 2, the new language declaring that we covenant, and this is really important to understand, we are expected to covenant congregation to congregation. So Columbus is covenanting with Auburn and its nearby neighbors to do what we need to do to act together as Unitarian Universalists, to support and assist each other, drawing upon our heritage of freedom, hope, and courage. A lot of that's up there. Building upon the foundation of love, with love at the center, surrounded by our shared values. And Bill showed us that. I was going to ask him to do that, but have you memorized that by now? So you've got the love in the center thing, and you've got the petals. You've got that all pictured. Values petals, as we are calling them, in equal measure. Or is it true? Are all of the values petals equally important to us? What do you think? To you? Do you have like a favorite one so far? Do you think they're all kind of equal? It's an interesting question. Or is there really a single dominant value? A dominant value about one's judgment about what is important in life? Well, there is an environmentalist who believes that there is one dominant value, and guess what that one is? Interdependence. Interdependence. Environmentalist Dekila Changyapa adamantly believes there is. In 2009, Dekila founded and led what she called the WWF Sacred Earth, a 5-year pilot program that built ecological partnerships with faith leaders and religious institutions in the Amazon, in East Africa, in the Himalayas and Mekong, and the United States. And for this pioneering environmental work, she received the prestigious Yale McCluskey Award in 2014. Undergirding her work in designing and implementing conservation and climate strategies and creating communities to which all of us can belong, at the center of things for her is interdependence. That, for her, is the singularly most important human value. What do you think so far? On the surface, we are told we appear to be separate and independent, yet underneath the surface, we are linked together. As Martin Luther King described it, and that's why I called it mutuality, because that's what he called it. He talked about interdependence, but he called it mutuality. And I'm sure you've done this reading, it's in our hymnal. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. I'm going to read it again because it's like all of the other things he wrote, so amazingly simple and profound. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. An article in Psychology Today on interdependence, the key to healthy relationships, emphasized the virtues of interdependence and the pitfalls of excessive independence, laying out the key characteristics. So I'm inviting you to listen to these and to see how they apply to your life and how they apply to the life of this congregation. Do we recognize these characteristics? Mutual support. Leaning on each other for emotional and practical and spiritual nourishment. Raise your hand. I always make you do this if you think you can relate to that, and that applies to your life. And the life of this congregation? Shared decision-making, collaborative problem-solving, emotional intimacy, vulnerability which deepens emotional connections between individuals, healthy boundaries, respectful interactions, and empathy, which strengthen relationship. Maybe not so much. That's one a lot of us have to work on. Keller points to the interdependence example provided by what she describes as the greatest strategic designer and community builder alive, nature herself. She notes that it turns out that Darwin's theory of evolution was incomplete. Evolutionary biologists have concluded that the individual survival of the fittest is but one stage in a larger evolutionary cycle, and that without intra- and interspecies cooperation built into the process, a purely selfish and competitive species is likely to die out. Resilience is the byproduct of building community, she writes, around the precept of interdependence. And this is both a demonstrable scientific fact for her, and for her a spiritual truth and a source of awakening. The power of embracing interdependence in the work we do as a collective, she believes, is that as a result of our interdependence, we automatically lean into inclusivity. We automatically lean into compassion. We automatically lean out of interdependence into natural sympathy. And we lean naturally into an ethics of care. Interdependence, as you see from what you use now call our values flower, while not at the center, is one of the petals, even indeed at the very top of the circle of values surrounding the key spiritual discipline of love. Remember that? It really is the top one. Do you think that that's an accident? Or maybe that's an intention, that the highest valued value for us is interdependence. And as Bill says, we honor the interdependent web of all existence, which does echo the language from our previous 7th UU principle. We covenant to cherish the earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. So what I would say to you, Bill, is that the original one was very much based on kind of an environmental sense of relationship to the whole of the universe. I think this interdependence values flower is much more about human relationships. It's much bigger. In one UU congregation's introduction to a shared values lesson plan for grades 2 to 5, so those are our kids ages 7 to 10, interdependence, the kids are told, means everything and every one of us are connected. What you do, we tell our children, affects me and affects others. We need to make choices based on this understanding. I'm always impressed by how simple the language is when we try to explain things to our children. And that's a very simple explanation of what interdependence is. Now, this is something I want to say parenthetically, and I promise to come back and do another talk about this if you'll have me. Our current values no longer include any language or around or reflect the long-held Unitarian emphasis on self-reliance. There's nothing about self-reliance in our values petals. And the right of individual conscience. There's nothing in our values about that. Or the independence of belief and action. There's nothing in our values petals around that. I think it's really the stuff of further pulpit conversation. What does it look like to embrace interdependence in the center of all things, at least for this one conversation? I mean, maybe we can talk about it for a few minutes afterwards, is why do we think that the real emphasis we used to have on independence, on individual right of conscience, is no longer in any of our values flowers? Is that a mistake? Is that intentional? And what do you think about that? The one way that we can really look at interdependence is through the lens of what we're going to call compassionate communities. Karen Armstrong, a former Catholic nun and writer of numerous books about religious affairs, tells us about that the principle of compassion, which lies at the heart of all ethical and spiritual traditions, flows from interdependence and connectedness. It calls us to always treat others as we would have others treat ourselves. As Native American and Indigenous people express it, to live in harmony, for we are all related. When she was awarded the TED Prize in 2007 from this organization that supports ideas worth spreading, and by the way, they won't give you an award if you take more than 18 minutes to describe it. I think it's a real lesson for those of us who preach, don't you think? I actually don't preach that long anymore. She decided to use the money she was given to help create, launch, and propagate a charter for compassion, which was written by leaders from a variety of major faiths that would, if successful, counter the voices of extremism and intolerance and hatred. Elements of this charter call upon all of us to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity and an informed empathy for the suffering of all human beings. And this is the hardest part of this, even those we regard as enemies. And how many of us are having a really hard time with that one right now? This is the big challenge of that, is the most attention we need to pay, the most interdependence, the most compassion needs to be addressed to those who we might consider our enemies. And I want you to raise your hand if you're completely clean on this, if you've been really mastered the art of loving your enemy. Oh, come on. Its stated mission is to promote and cultivate the principle of compassion and the compassionate way of life. So this compassion characterizes all of human society and all of our relationships. As Karen Armstrong declares, to make compassion, which again rises from our interdependence, a clear, a luminous, and dynamic force in an increasingly polarized world. A clear, luminous, and dynamic force in an increasingly polarized world. Since its inception, at the heart of the Charter for Compassion's work is its campaign for what is called a compassionate community. Compassionate communities, in the beginning focused on building a network of cities, but it soon became evident that communities both larger and smaller than cities wanted to join a movement to embrace compassion as our core value. The Charter has grown to encompass nearly 50 countries, over 440 cities and communities signing up to develop and promote compassionate initiatives. Now, what does that mean? What does a compassionate initiative mean? It doesn't subscribe to a single definition, believing that sustainable change emerges differently from varied communities, inviting them to bring compassion to life in practical and specific ways, using processes denied and carried out by diverse and inclusive coalitions of people. Is a compassionate city or a compassionate community of any size or makeup a place that cares for all of its residents in all aspects of their lives? A place that looks to the future and the care of the environment? One that values the arts, sees healthcare as a necessity, supports and uplifts people of all ages, nationalities, and religious affiliations? I could not determine whether or not Columbus or any nearby places ever have signed on to the Charter. Do you know that? Do you know that if Columbus ever did sign on to a Charter of Compassion? I was at one time the co-chair of the compassionate community in my small town of Decatur, Georgia. In the early years, when there was at least a bit of a push, a rush, in fact, to do so, voted by our city commission with the vaguest possible buy-in, with little or no vision or commitment to follow through attached to the designation. It frankly has only been what I would call kindly, intermittently effective. And herein lies one of the challenges with any kind of initiative. A city council or commission or state house vote to become a compassionate community may mean as little as being yet another symbolic proclamation. My town of Decatur, Georgia is a kid-friendly city, a senior-friendly city, a pet-friendly city, a tree-friendly city, and a compassionate community. How much does that mean after a while? Or as much as becoming a meaningful and even rigorous framework for planning, for regulating, for budgeting, for creating a place that we can live in that is welcoming to all. There have been some model compassionate communities initiatives around the issue of drug use, around gang violence, lack of equitable health care, and youth empowerment. And for some reason, Louisville, Kentucky has had, in particular, some solid, viable citywide campaigns, including something that sounds like it might even work in Columbus, the Mayor's Give a Day Week, Give a Day Week where the entire city makes time for volunteering and acts of interconnection and compassion. And then another one that sounds really intriguing to me. Are there benches in Columbus, like public benches? This is called the Compassionate Bench Project, designed to provide safe spots around the city where intergenerational conversations can happen. So kids can talk to seniors about what it means to live in a compassionate community. And there was a community cleanup at one time of a vandalized mosque. So Louisville, Kentucky actually has done some concrete things to live out its title as a compassionate city. So this is my suggestion for you. What if this UU congregation launched its own compassionate community in the following year, in the coming year? And I'm thinking that especially no matter what happens in the election. Maybe this is something solid. Maybe this is something hopeful. Maybe this is something that will help bend the arc of justice, is to form a compassionate community here in this congregation. It's our own effort to place interdependence at the heart of who we are, or at least one of the hearts of who we are. What if we invited other faith communities and human rights partners to join in, focusing on which arenas might be the most pressing for doing unto others what we would want done unto ourselves, and how? Would it be an LGBTQ rights initiative? Would it be Black Lives Matter? Would it be climate justice? Would it be support of immigrants? Would it be mental health? Would it be dementia? What would be the initiatives that we could pull forward under the guise of being a compassionate community? A compassionate community within here, a compassionate community out in the community. Karen Armstrong reminds us that a compassionate city, a compassionate community, is an uncomfortable community. A community that is uncomfortable when anyone is homeless or hungry. Uncomfortable if every child is not loved and given rich opportunities to grow and to thrive. Uncomfortable when any group anywhere in the world, starting here in Columbus, is marginalized or oppressed. Uncomfortable when we err too much on the side of rugged independence and self-sufficiency. Uncomfortable when we don't treat our neighbors as we wish to be treated. Well, may we always live in uncomfortable places, in mutuality, interdependently, and may it be so. So, what do you think? What do you think? You gonna do it?
We have time for questions.
Time for questions.
I'll try from the top.
Yeah.
By saying I'm one of those that was a little disturbed that the democratic process and the right of conscience
Yeah.
the pursuit of our own unique searches for truth and meaning were left out, since those are three of the things that really attracted me to this fellowship.
Yeah, and we're foundational to the development of at least the Unitarian side of our faith. People who wanted not to follow dogma, people who wanted their own right of conscience, especially on the Unitarian side. It's been really important. If you look at Thoreau and the Transcendentalists, how important their own thought, their own relationship with the environment were to them. And yet I don't see it anywhere in our values petals. Maybe I missed something, but it's pretty much gone. Let alone that democracy, the right to the democratic process is no longer there explicitly either. So, what do you think?
I was just going to say, I think our church voted whether we wanted to change the principles, and our church voted not to.
Not to?
Yeah.
Well, from what I gather, some people are making very tangible statements by making sure that our original 7 principles are in the bylaws of your congregation. That makes us a statement, because nobody's telling any congregation you can't do that, but if you want to make it real explicit, you can actually make sure that they are embedded in your bylaws. But I know there was distress around that, for sure.